Good morning. On what basis are you asking for my
I
identification?
have authority to check anyone's immigration status. You look like you might be here illegally. Your appearance gives me reasonable suspicion.
I'm standing up as you commanded. I've been unlawfully detained based on racial profiling
Sir, do
while
not
eating
interfere with
breakfast.
the federal officer. Stand up.
And you just racially profiled a fellow officer.
Hashtag ICE agent demands papers from off-duty black police officer. He's a lieutenant. Wins $11.9 million lawsuit. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agent Derek Santos, badge number 4729 with 6 years at ICE, was conducting what he called a routine compliance check at a diner in downtown Phoenix at 7:30 a.m. on a Wednesday morning when he saw a black man sitting alone in a booth eating breakfast and reading a newspaper, and immediately decided this person looked foreign and needed to be questioned about his immigration status. Without observing any suspicious behavior, without receiving any tips or credible information suggesting the man was undocumented, and despite the fact that demanding papers from someone based solely on their appearance violates the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, Santos approached the man's table and loudly demanded, "I need to see your identification and proof of citizenship right now," while other diners watched in uncomfortable silence. When the man calmly looked up from his newspaper and asked, "On what basis are you asking for my identification?" Santos became hostile and stated, "You look like you might be here illegally, and I have authority to check anyone's status," claiming the man's appearance and accent gave him reasonable suspicion despite the man having spoken only a dozen words in perfect unaccented English. Despite the man explaining he was a United States citizen born in Phoenix, Arizona, and offering to show his driver's license if Santos would first articulate what specific, articulable reasonable suspicion justified the demand, Santos insisted that refusing to immediately provide papers is obstruction, and threatened the man with detention and deportation, telling him, "If you were really American, you'd have no problem showing ID." When the man calmly but firmly stated, "I'm a United States citizen. I'm eating breakfast in a public restaurant, and unless you can articulate specific reasonable suspicion of a crime or immigration violation, I'm not obligated to provide papers on demand," Santos grabbed the man's arm, announced he was being detained for investigation of illegal presence in the United States, and began forcing him out of his booth while other diners protested, and the diner manager insisted the man was a regular customer who'd been coming there for years. What Agent Santos didn't know was that he had just racially profiled and physically assaulted Lieutenant Andre Williams, a 16-year decorated veteran of the Phoenix Police Department who was enjoying his morning off before an afternoon shift. That Williams was not only a U.S. citizen but a sworn law enforcement officer with extensive knowledge of constitutional law and civil rights, that the entire encounter was being recorded by the diner security cameras, and by several patrons who recognized the blatant racial profiling and pulled out their phones to document it, and that Santos's decision to demand papers from a black police lieutenant eating breakfast based solely on racist assumptions about who looks American would result in his immediate suspension. A Department of Justice investigation revealing a pattern of unconstitutional racial profiling by ICE agents in the region, criminal charges for deprivation of rights under color of law, termination from federal service, an $11.9 million settlement paid to Williams for the constitutional violation and public humiliation, and viral footage with 178 million views that would spark congressional hearings on racial profiling in immigration enforcement and lead to Justice Department reforms on ICE's authority to conduct warrantless compliance checks in public spaces. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where you're tuning in from. If you believe eating breakfast while black shouldn't result in demands for papers, then like this video and subscribe. Lieutenant Andre Williams walked into Rosie's Diner on Central Avenue in downtown Phoenix at 7:15 a.m. on a Wednesday morning in early June, following a routine he'd maintained for the past 8 years. At 41 years old, Williams was a 16-year veteran of the Phoenix Police Department, currently serving as a lieutenant in the Major Crimes Division. He'd risen through the ranks from patrol officer to detective to sergeant to his current position through exceptional work, commendations for bravery, and a reputation for both excellent police work and commitment to constitutional policing. Wednesday was Williams's regular day off from his usual Tuesday through Saturday shift schedule. His morning ritual on his day off was consistent. Wake up at 6:30 a.m., go for a run, shower, and head to Rosie's Diner for breakfast before spending the rest of the morning handling personal errands or relaxing before his daughters got home from school. Williams was dressed casually in civilian clothes, a polo shirt, jeans, and sneakers, appropriate for a day off. He carried no visible police equipment or identification, as he preferred to keep his law enforcement career separate from his personal time when possible. He looked exactly like what he was, a professional man in his early 40s, enjoying a quiet breakfast on his day off. Rosie's Diner was a Phoenix institution, a family-owned establishment that had served the downtown community for 35 years. The staff knew Williams well. He'd been a regular customer for 8 years, always ordering the same breakfast: scrambled eggs, wheat toast, bacon, and black coffee, with a side of fruit. The waitress, Maria Rodriguez, greeted him warmly as he entered. "Morning, Andre. Your usual booth." Williams smiled. "Morning, Maria. Yeah, the usual would be perfect. Thanks." He settled into his preferred booth near the window, where he could watch the morning foot traffic on Central Avenue while enjoying his breakfast and catching up on the news. Maria brought his coffee within a minute, and he pulled out his smartphone to read the digital edition of the Arizona Republic while waiting for his food. The diner had about a dozen other customers at this early hour, a mix of downtown office workers grabbing breakfast before work, a few retirees who treated the diner as their morning social club, and some construction workers from a nearby job site. It was a typical Wednesday morning at Rosie's. Quiet, comfortable, and unremarkable. At 7:28 a.m., Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agent Derek Santos entered the diner. Santos, 34 years old with 6 years at ICE, was part of what the agency called a fugitive operations team, tasked with locating and apprehending individuals with final orders of removal who had failed to depart the United States. However, Santos and his team had developed a practice that went far beyond their legitimate enforcement authority, conducting what they called compliance checks or area canvasses in public places, where they would approach people they deemed suspicious based on appearance and demand identification and proof of citizenship. This practice was legally problematic for multiple reasons. First, ICE agents, like all law enforcement, are bound by the Fourth Amendment's requirement that searches and seizures be supported by reasonable suspicion or probable cause. Demanding identification based solely on someone's appearance, without specific articulable facts suggesting they've committed a crime or immigration violation, constitutes an unconstitutional seizure. Second, selecting people for questioning based on race or ethnicity violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which prohibits discriminatory enforcement of the law. Third, United States citizens and lawful permanent residents have no legal obligation to carry papers proving their status at all times, and cannot be detained simply for declining to produce such documentation on demand. Despite these clear constitutional limitations, Santos and his team had been conducting these compliance checks for months, targeting people they deemed suspicious based primarily on appearance, a practice that disproportionately affected Latino individuals and anyone Santos perceived as foreign-looking. Santos entered Rosie's Diner and immediately began scanning the room, looking for people who, in his biased judgment, might be undocumented. His eyes settled on Lieutenant Williams, a black man sitting alone, reading on his phone, waiting for breakfast. Santos made a decision based entirely on racial profiling. Williams, in Santos's view, looked like he might be an immigrant, possibly from Africa or the Caribbean, and therefore needed to be questioned about his status. This assumption was based on nothing more than Williams's race and Santos's prejudice. Williams had been born in Phoenix. He'd lived his entire life in Arizona. He spoke with no accent whatsoever. He was wearing ordinary American casual clothing. He was doing nothing remotely suspicious. He was simply sitting in a booth at a diner, reading news on his phone while waiting for breakfast. But to Santos, a black man eating breakfast was someone who needed to prove his right to be in the United States. Santos approached Williams's table with an aggressive posture and spoke loudly enough that nearby diners turned to look. "Excuse me. I need to see your identification and proof of citizenship right now." Williams looked up from his phone, his expression shifting from relaxed to alert. After 16 years in law enforcement, Williams immediately recognized what was happening. He was being racially profiled by a federal agent who had made assumptions based on his appearance. Williams kept his voice calm and professional. "On what basis are you asking for my identification?" Santos's face showed annoyance at being questioned. "I'm an ICE agent. I have authority to check immigration status. I need to see your papers, driver's license, passport, birth certificate, naturalization papers, green card, whatever you have to prove you're here legally." Williams's eyes narrowed slightly. He knew the law, both as a police lieutenant and as someone who'd studied constitutional law extensively during his career. "Officer, I'm a United States citizen. I was born here in Phoenix. I'm eating breakfast. What specific, articulable reasonable suspicion do you have that I've violated immigration law?" Santos's face reddened. "You look like you might be here illegally. Your appearance gives me reasonable suspicion. And you have an accent." Williams almost laughed at the absurdity. He'd spoken perhaps 20 words total, all in perfect American English with the standard Phoenix accent. "I don't have an accent. I was born here. I've lived here my entire life. And looking a certain way isn't reasonable suspicion. You can't demand ID from someone based solely on their race or appearance." Santos leaned closer, his voice taking on a threatening tone. "If you were really American, you'd have no problem showing ID. Refusing to cooperate is making me more suspicious. Show me your papers now, or I'm detaining you for investigation." Williams felt his jaw tighten but maintained his composure. "I'm not refusing anything. I'm asking you to articulate what specific facts give you reasonable suspicion that I've violated immigration law. The Fourth Amendment requires reasonable suspicion for a detention. Looking foreign isn't reasonable suspicion, that's racial profiling." Santos had clearly never been challenged on his illegal compliance checks before. Most people, when confronted by a federal agent demanding papers, complied out of fear or confusion about their rights, even when they were U.S. citizens. Williams, with his law enforcement background and constitutional knowledge, was not going to comply with an unlawful demand. "I'm giving you one more chance," Santos said, his hand moving to his handcuffs. "Produce identification and proof of citizenship, or you're being detained for investigation of illegal presence in the United States." Williams remained seated, his hands visible on the table, his posture non-threatening. "I'm a United States citizen. I'm eating breakfast in a public restaurant. I've committed no crime. Unless you can articulate specific reasonable suspicion of an immigration violation, which you haven't, I'm not legally obligated to provide papers on demand. This is the United States, not a papers-required authoritarian state." Santos made his move. He grabbed Williams's arm and announced loudly, "You're being detained for investigation. Stand up and come with me." Williams, with his law enforcement training, knew that physically resisting even an unlawful detention could escalate the situation dangerously. He decided to comply physically while continuing to object verbally, creating a clear record. "I'm complying with your physical commands, but I'm verbally stating this is an unlawful detention without reasonable suspicion. I'm a United States citizen. You're violating my Fourth Amendment rights." Santos pulled Williams from the booth, forcing him to stand. He then spun Williams around and began to apply handcuffs. The diner had gone silent. Other customers were watching in shock. Several had pulled out their phones and were recording. Maria, the waitress who'd served Williams for 8 years, approached Santos. "Excuse me, officer, but Andre is a regular customer here. He comes in all the time. He's a police lieutenant with Phoenix PD. You're making a mistake." Santos ignored her. "Ma'am, step back. This is a federal immigration enforcement action." An older man at a nearby table spoke up. "Son, I've been eating here for 20 years. I've known Andre for half that time. He's as American as apple pie. He's a cop, for God's sake." What are you doing? Santos finished applying the handcuffs, tighter than necessary, causing Williams pain, and turned to address the diner. This man is being detained for investigation of illegal presence. Anyone who interferes will be charged with obstruction of a federal officer. Williams, now handcuffed, maintained his calm but made sure to speak clearly for the benefit of the recording phones. My name is Lieutenant Andre Williams. I'm a United States citizen, born in Phoenix, Arizona, on March 8, 1982. I'm a lieutenant with the Phoenix Police Department, badge number 2847. I've been unlawfully detained based on racial profiling while eating breakfast. I was given no articulable reasonable suspicion. I'm not resisting, I'm complying. But this is a violation of my constitutional rights. Santos froze. You're claiming to be a police officer? I'm not claiming. I am a police lieutenant. My badge and credentials are in my vehicle in the parking lot. I'm off duty. I was eating breakfast. And you just racially profiled and unlawfully detained a fellow law enforcement officer based on assumptions about my race. Santos's face showed he was beginning to realize the magnitude of his error, but he doubled down. If you're really a cop, why didn't you identify yourself immediately? Williams's response was calm but devastating. Because I shouldn't have to. I'm a United States citizen. I don't have to prove my citizenship to federal agents while eating breakfast. That's not how the Constitution works. You approached me, demanded papers, and detained me based solely on how I look. That's racial profiling. That's a Fourth Amendment violation. And the fact that I happen to be a police lieutenant doesn't make it worse. It would be equally unconstitutional if you'd done this to any other citizen. The Constitution protects everyone, not just cops. By this point, the diner manager, Tom Chin, had called Phoenix Police Department dispatch to report that one of their lieutenants was being detained by a federal agent. Within 4 minutes, 2 Phoenix PD patrol units arrived at the diner. The responding officers, both of whom recognized Lieutenant Williams immediately, entered to find their superior officer handcuffed by an ICE agent. Officer Jessica Martinez, one of the responding officers, approached Santos carefully. Agent, I'm Officer Martinez with Phoenix PD. That's our Lieutenant Williams. Can you explain what's happening here? Santos, now clearly flustered, tried to maintain authority. I'm conducting an immigration enforcement action. This individual refused to provide identification when requested. Martinez looked at Williams, who gave her a slight nod indicating he was okay. She turned back to Santos. Agent Santos, Lieutenant Williams is a United States citizen and a Phoenix police lieutenant. What was your reasonable suspicion for the initial contact? Santos had no good answer. He looked. I had reason to believe he might be undocumented. Based on what specific facts? Martinez pressed. His appearance. He looked foreign. The second responding officer, Michael Torres, spoke up. Agent Santos, looking foreign isn't reasonable suspicion. That's racial profiling. You need to remove those handcuffs from our lieutenant immediately. Santos, realizing he was surrounded by city police officers defending their superior and that multiple people were recording the encounter, removed the handcuffs from Williams's wrists. Williams rubbed his wrists, checking the red marks and abrasions from the over-tightened cuffs. He looked at